History remembers conquerors for the cities they burned and the armies they crushed. But what about the man who conquered nations without drawing a single sword? What about the king whose weapon was so devastating that its effects are still measurable in modern economics 700 years later? This is the story of Mansa Musa, the African emperor who became so impossibly wealthy that his act of religious charity accidentally destroyed the economies of entire nations. A man so generous that his generosity became an economic weapon. The ruler of Mali, who proved that sometimes the most dangerous thing approaching over the desert horizon isn't an army. It's a caravan carrying more gold than most kingdoms have ever seen. Here's the mind-bending fact. When Mansa Musa took a pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, he brought so much gold that he single-handedly caused inflation that lasted a decade across 3 continents. He literally broke the economic system of the medieval Mediterranean world by being too generous. This wasn't just about wealth. This was about power, faith, and the collision between African magnificence and a world that had convinced itself Africa had nothing to offer. When cities heard that Mansa Musa's caravan was approaching, rulers prepared not for war, but for something far more destabilizing. An encounter with wealth so vast it would make their treasuries look like children's piggy banks. How does a king from the edge of the Sahara become so powerful that his mere presence destabilizes international trade? How does religious devotion transform into geopolitical dominance? And what happens when you have so much gold that giving it away becomes more dangerous than hoarding it? Gothic cathedrals stone by stone. The Mongol Empire dominates Asia. The Islamic world connects continents through trade routes that European Christians can barely imagine. And in West Africa, the Mali Empire controls something that the entire medieval world desperately needs: gold. Not just some gold. By conservative estimates, Mali controls nearly half of the world's gold supply. The empire stretches across territory larger than Western Europe, encompassing the legendary cities of Timbuktu and Gao, controlling trade routes that funnel salt, copper, ivory, and slaves across the Sahara. This is an empire built on resources so valuable that European kingdoms literally can't mint enough coins without African gold. The empire's capital, Niani, sits in a landscape of rivers and gold-rich soil. But it's the Sahara's southern edge where Mali's true power lives, in the control of trans-Saharan trade routes, where caravans of thousands traverse hellish conditions to move wealth between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean world. These aren't simple trade journeys. They're epic odysseys taking months, where entire fortunes can be made or lost in sandstorms, where the difference between life and death is knowing where the next oasis lies. Into this world steps Mansa Musa, 10th ruler of Mali, a devout Muslim who has consolidated power over a fractious empire and now feels the call that every faithful Muslim must answer: the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. But Mansa Musa isn't planning an ordinary pilgrimage. He's planning a statement, a demonstration, a geopolitical power move disguised as religious devotion. He's about to assemble a caravan so magnificent, so impossibly wealthy, that it will rewrite how the world sees Africa for generations. And when that caravan begins its march toward Cairo, the first city in its path, no one is prepared for what's about to happen to their economy. Mansa Musa doesn't start as emperor. Born around 1280, he's designated as deputy to his predecessor, Mansa Abu Bakr the Setters. Untold second, a king obsessed with a different kind of impossible journey. Abu Bakr believes the Atlantic Ocean must have another shore, another land beyond the horizon that Malian sailors have never reached. Despite advisors warning him that hundreds of ships have vanished attempting this journey, Abu Bakr assembles a massive fleet. In 1312, Abu Bakr does the unthinkable for a medieval monarch. He abdicates. He leaves his empire in Musa's hands and sails west across the Atlantic with 2,000 ships carrying soldiers, provisions, and gold. The fleet vanishes completely. No ships return. No word ever comes back. Abu Bakr sails straight out of history and into legend. Suddenly, Musa isn't deputy anymore. He's emperor of the wealthiest kingdom in Africa, thrust into power through one of the strangest transitions in medieval history. And unlike his predecessor who chased impossible dreams across the ocean, Musa has a different vision. He will make Mali so powerful, so prestigious, that the entire Islamic world will have to acknowledge West African civilization as equal to any kingdom in Cairo, Baghdad, or Damascus. The Mali Empire that Musa inherits is powerful but fragile. It's a patchwork of conquered kingdoms, ethnic groups speaking dozens of languages, cities that resent paying tribute to Niani. The Soso people remember their own empire before Mali crushed them. The Songhai people in Gao have their own proud traditions. Berber traders in the north maintain their own networks and loyalties. Musa's first years are spent securing power through a combination of strategic brilliance and careful relationship management. He strengthens the empire's military, ensuring that the famous Malian cavalry, warriors whose horses are so valuable that each mount is worth more than most men will earn in a lifetime, remain loyal to Niani. He cultivates relationships with Islamic scholars, bringing them to his court, building mosques, establishing Mali as a center of Islamic learning. But Musa understands something crucial. In the medieval Islamic world, legitimacy comes not just from military might or wealth, but from visible piety and connection to the holy cities of Islam. The greatest Muslim rulers make the Hajj. They bring gifts to Mecca and Medina. They demonstrate their devotion through spectacular displays of faith and generosity. Musa decides he will make a Hajj that surpasses anything the Islamic world has ever seen. For over a year, preparations consume the empire. Musa sends word throughout Mali. He wants the finest of everything, the best scholars to accompany him, the most skilled craftsmen, the most loyal warriors, and gold, incomprehensible amounts of gold. The logistics alone are staggering. A journey to Mecca from Mali covers roughly 4,000 miles, equivalent to walking from New York to Los Angeles and back. The route crosses the Sahara Desert, follows the Nile, and traverses multiple kingdoms and territories, each with their own rulers, customs, and potential dangers. A normal trading caravan might number a few hundred people and animals. Musa is planning something else entirely. Contemporary Arab historians record numbers that still seem impossible. 60,000 people. Some accounts say 80,000. Soldiers, servants, merchants, scholars, slaves, musicians, and courtiers. 500 slaves, each carrying a golden staff weighing 4 pounds. 80 to 100 camels, each loaded with 300 pounds of gold dust. Personal servants, doctors, teachers, and Islamic scholars to ensure proper religious observance throughout the journey. The gold alone represents an astronomical sum. Conservative estimates suggest Musa brings 12 to 15 tons of gold. Some historians argue it could be significantly more. To put this in perspective, this is more gold than most European kingdoms see in a generation, carried as pocket money for a religious pilgrimage. Think about the supply chain required. Every person needs food and water for a year-long journey. Every camel, horse, and pack animal needs provisions. Desert crossings require knowing exactly where every oasis lies, exactly how much water each person can carry, exactly how far they can travel between water sources. One miscalculation means death for hundreds. Musa assembles advisors who have made the desert crossing before. He sends advance parties to secure permissions from kingdoms along the route. He negotiates safe passage, arranges for supply caches, and ensures that every town and city they'll pass through knows that Mansa Musa of Mali is coming. And in 1324, the caravan finally departs Niani. Imagine standing in a Saharan village, as Musa's caravan approaches. First, you see the dust cloud on the horizon, so massive that it looks like a sandstorm. Then you hear the sounds, thousands of footsteps, animal bellows, the jingling of countless bells and ceremonial items. Then you see them, an endless river of humanity stretching to the horizon. Soldiers in formation wearing armor that gleams in the desert sun. Camels swaying under impossible loads, their decorative saddles worth more than your entire village. Slaves dressed in Persian silk, horses bred for war, prancing nervously in the heat. And gold, gold, everywhere. Gold staffs catching the sunlight, gold dust in leather bags, gold thread in clothing, gold decorations on everything. The caravan moves like a mobile city. At night, they establish camps that sprawl across miles of desert. Tents rise in organized sections, one for Musa's court, another for soldiers, another for servants, designated areas for animals and supplies. Fires dot the landscape like stars. Musicians play through the evening. Islamic prayers echo 5 times daily, with thousands responding in unison. The psychological impact is calculated and devastating. Musa isn't just traveling to Mecca, he's demonstrating power. Every person who sees this caravan understands immediately. Mali is not some remote, primitive kingdom. This is wealth and organizational capability that rivals anything in Cairo or Baghdad. But the Sahara is merciless, even to the wealthy. People die in the crossing, from heat, from thirst, from disease, from the 1,000 dangers that lurk in one of Earth's harshest environments. Musa loses people he started with. Animals collapse under their loads. Supply calculations that seemed perfect in Niani prove insufficient in the reality of 120-degree heat and endless sand. Yet the caravan pushes on. Week after week, month after month, the impossible procession continues north toward the Mediterranean, toward Cairo, toward the moment when the Islamic world will finally see Mali's true power, when Mansa Musa's caravan approaches Cairo in July 1324. The Mamluk Sultanate that controls Egypt faces an unprecedented diplomatic crisis. Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad ibn Qalawun rules one of the medieval world's great powers. Cairo is a sophisticated cosmopolitan city of roughly 500,000 people, one of the largest cities on Earth. The Mamluks have seen everything: crusader armies, Mongol invasions, trading missions from across the known world. They have never seen anything like Mansa Musa. Arab historian al-Umari, writing 14 years after Musa's visit, interviews people who witnessed the caravan's arrival and records their accounts. The testimony is unanimous. Cairo's economy has never experienced anything comparable to Musa's 3-month stay. Here's where Musa's religious devotion becomes an economic weapon. Islamic tradition emphasizes charity, generosity to the poor, and gift-giving to demonstrate wealth and status. Musa takes these obligations seriously, catastrophically seriously. He begins distributing gold the moment he enters Cairo's jurisdiction. To beggars in the street, gold. To minor officials, gold. To scholars and mosques, gold. To merchants and traders, gold. To entertainers and guides, gold. The amounts aren't tokens. Musa gives away gold by the fistful, by the pound, by the bag. He purchases supplies for his caravan at prices that make merchants' eyes water with joy. When entertained by Cairo's elite, he gives gifts that make their own treasuries look modest. Contemporary accounts describe Musa's spending as nearly frantic. He seems driven by an urgent need to demonstrate not just wealth, but generosity on a scale that will become legendary. Every transaction, every gift, every charitable donation is calculated to reinforce one message: Mali is not just wealthy. It's so wealthy that gold itself becomes almost commonplace. Within weeks, Cairo's gold market collapses. Here's what happens when you suddenly flood an economy with precious metal. Inflation spirals out of control. gold's value derives partly from scarcity. When Musa dumps tons of gold into Cairo's economy over 3 months, he destroys that scarcity. The price of gold plummets. And because gold is the basis for currency and trade throughout the Mediterranean world, everything connected to gold-based transactions becomes unstable. Merchants who held gold as investment suddenly watch their wealth lose value daily. The exchange rate between gold and silver goes haywire. Prices for goods and services become unpredictable. Should you price based on yesterday's gold value or today's? People who borrowed gold-based currency before Musa's arrival can now repay their debts with devalued gold, devastating lenders. International traders find their carefully calculated profit margins evaporating because gold's value has changed since they departed their home ports. Al-Umari, records that Musa's spending left no court. Emir nor holder of a royal office without the gift of a load of gold. He notes that the people of Cairo made incalculable profits out of him and his suite in buying and selling and giving and taking. They exchanged gold until they depressed its value in Egypt and caused its price to fall. The economic disruption spreads like ripples from a stone dropped in a pond. Traders leaving Cairo carry news of the gold glut to other cities. Mecca, Damascus, and cities throughout the Mamluk Sultanate experience secondary effects as the gold-to-goods ratio destabilizes. European merchants trading through Egyptian ports find their calculations suddenly meaningless. The crisis lasts over a decade. Some historians argue Cairo's gold market doesn't fully stabilize until the 1340s, more than 15 years after Musa's visit. One man's charitable generosity creates an economic earthquake affecting 3 continents. But Musa isn't finished demonstrating Mali's power. While Cairo's economists panic, Musa pursues another objective: establishing Mali as an Islamic intellectual center. He meets with Al-Azhar University scholars, Egypt's greatest Islamic legal minds, and the architectural geniuses who've built Cairo's magnificent mosques and palaces. Musa makes them an offer many can't refuse: come to Mali, receive wealth beyond imagination, and help transform Timbuktu into a rival of Cairo and Baghdad. He specifically recruits Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, a renowned poet and architect from Granada, Spain. Al-Sahili is reluctant. West Africa seems impossibly remote from the Islamic world's cultural centers. Musa reportedly gives him 200 kilograms of gold as an inducement. Al-Sahili agrees to come. This recruitment strategy is brilliant geopolitics. By bringing Cairo's scholars to Mali, Musa accomplishes multiple goals simultaneously. He imports expertise to elevate Mali's intellectual and architectural sophistication. He creates personal connections between Mali and the Islamic world's elite. He demonstrates that Mali can compete with any kingdom for talent and prestige. And he ensures that these scholars will return to their networks with stories of Malian magnificence. After 3 months in Cairo, Musa continues toward Mecca. The caravan has shrunk somewhat. Some people have died, some have stayed in Cairo, and Musa has distributed enough gold that his supply train is significantly lighter. But the essential magnificence remains. The journey from Cairo to Mecca follows established pilgrimage routes, but Musa's massive entourage creates logistical nightmares for every city along the way. Feeding and housing 60,000 people plus animals requires resources that strain even major cities. Musa pays handsomely for everything, continuing his pattern of transformative generosity. In Mecca, Musa performs the Hajj rituals with elaborate ceremony. He circles the Kaaba 7 times with his enormous entourage. He prays at the Grand Mosque surrounded by his golden staff-carrying slaves. He distributes more gifts, more gold, more demonstrations of Malian wealth and piety. Contemporary accounts describe Muslim pilgrims from across the Islamic world watching in awe. Many have never heard of Mali. Suddenly, they're witnessing an African emperor whose display of wealth makes the grandest Arabian or Persian nobles look almost modest. Questions ripple through the pilgrim crowds. Where exactly is Mali? How can one kingdom possess this much gold? Is this display even possible, or are we witnessing some kind of elaborate illusion? Musa accomplishes exactly what he intended. Mali enters the Islamic consciousness not as a remote curiosity, but as a major power deserving respect and recognition. But on the return journey, Musa faces an unexpected problem. He's running out of money. Yes, the wealthiest man in medieval history has spent himself into financial difficulty. The lavish gift-giving, the massive entourage expenses, the continuous purchasing of supplies and services. Even Mali's legendary wealth has limits. Musa has distributed so much gold that his remaining supply is insufficient to maintain his caravan's needs for the return journey. For most rulers, this would be a catastrophic embarrassment. But Musa's earlier generosity now pays unexpected dividends. The economic chaos he created in Cairo means that Egyptian merchants are desperate to recover gold. They're willing to loan enormous sums at high interest rates to get gold back into circulation at its former value. So Mansa Musa, having crashed Cairo's economy through excessive generosity, now borrows heavily from the very merchants who profited from his spending. Contemporary historian Al-Umari records that Musa borrowed from the merchants, and his obligation to them amounted to 50,000 dinars. This is the only recorded instance of Musa borrowing money, a detail that somehow makes his overall wealth more credible. It's the kind of specific, counterintuitive fact that propaganda would never invent. Musa returns to Mali having accomplished something unprecedented. He's successfully made the Hajj with unparalleled magnificence and, in the process, temporarily destabilized Mediterranean trade. The caravan that limps back into Niani in late 1325 or early 1326 is vastly different from the one that departed. Thousands of the original travelers have died or stayed in cities along the route. The gold is gone. The pristine organization has weathered thousands of miles of desert, disease, and exhaustion. But Musa returns with something more valuable than gold: legitimacy, prestige, and architectural expertise. Abu Ishaq al-Sahili and other recruited scholars begin transforming Mali's cities. Al-Sahili designs new mosques in Timbuktu and Gao, introducing architectural styles that blend North African sophistication with local materials and techniques. The Jinguereber Mosque in Timbuktu, completed around 1327, becomes a symbol of Mali's new status, a building that proves West African kingdoms can create monuments rivaling anything in Cairo or Damascus. Timbuktu transforms from a desert trading post into an intellectual center. Musa establishes a famous Islamic university, which grows into one of Islam's great centers of learning. Scholars from across the Islamic world begin traveling to Timbuktu, drawn by tales of generous royal patronage and growing academic prestige. The city's libraries eventually house hundreds of thousands of manuscripts on subjects ranging from Islamic law to mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. Musa's pilgrimage has accomplished exactly what he intended. Mali is now firmly established on the medieval world's mental map, not as some remote curiosity, but as a major power whose wealth and Islamic devotion command respect. The most telling evidence of Musa's success appears in European mapmaking. In 1339, just 15 years after Musa's journey, an old European map, one of medieval Europe's most important maps, prominently features Mansa Musa. The map depicts him sitting on a throne, holding a golden orb and scepter with a golden crown. The caption reads, "This Negro lord is called King Musa, Lord of the Negroes of West Africa. So abundant is the gold which is found in his country that he is the richest and most noble king in all the land." This is extraordinary. European cartographers have almost no direct contact with sub-Saharan Africa. Their information comes third and fourth hand from Arab traders and travelers. Yet they consider Mali's king important, enough to feature prominently on a map designed to show European merchants. The most crucial economic and political information about the known world, Musa has accomplished something nearly impossible for a medieval African ruler. He's forced Europe to acknowledge African wealth and power. For subsequent generations, European knowledge of sub-Saharan Africa centers almost entirely on stories of Mansa Musa's legendary wealth. But this fame comes with a price Mali's rulers will eventually pay in blood. Musa's final years are spent consolidating the empire's transformation. He continues building mosques, supporting scholars, and maintaining the trade networks that funnel gold northward across the Sahara. The empire reaches its maximum territorial extent, roughly 500,000 square miles, controlling territories from the Atlantic coast to modern-day Niger, from the Sahara's edge deep into West Africa's forested regions. But Mali's power depends on factors Musa can't ultimately control. The gold mines that fund everything are scattered across territories that resent Malian rule. The trans-Saharan trade routes that bring Mediterranean wealth depend on desert guides who maintain their own loyalties. The Songhai people in Gao remember their independence and chafe under Malian authority. The empire is magnificent, but vulnerable. Musa dies around 1337, roughly 12 years after his return from Mecca. Accounts of his final years are sparse. Arab historians focused more on his spectacular pilgrimage than his quieter final decade. He's succeeded by his son, Musa's son, but the succession isn't smooth. The empire fragments slightly. Cities assert more autonomy. Trade revenue decreases as various factions fight for control. Here's the tragic irony. Musa's successful demonstration of Mali's wealth eventually contributes to European exploitation of Africa. The same maps that celebrate Mansa Musa become guides for European powers seeking African gold. The stories of Mali's wealth that Musa carefully cultivated fuel European imagination about African riches waiting to be taken. When Portuguese explorers begin probing Africa's Atlantic coast in the 1400s, they're partly motivated by tales of kingdoms so wealthy that their kings give away gold by the fistful. Musa wanted Europe to respect African civilization. Instead, he helped create a legend that would eventually motivate European colonization, a deep process that would devastate the very kingdoms Musa had elevated. The Mali Empire itself begins. Declining within decades of Musa's death, the Songhai people eventually revolt and establish their own empire centered on Gao, eclipsing Mali's power. By the 1600s, Mali has fragmented into smaller kingdoms. The political entity that Musa strengthened fragments back into regional powers competing for trade control. Timbuktu survives longer as an intellectual center, but even this gradually declines as trans-Saharan trade routes shift, and European coastal trading posts offer alternatives to desert crossings. The manuscripts and scholars that Musa attracted gradually disperse. By the time European colonizers arrive in force in the 1800s, Mali's golden age is a distant memory. What do we make of Musa's legacy? He strengthened his empire, elevated Islamic scholarship in West Africa, and demonstrated African civilization's sophistication to the medieval world. He was genuinely devout, fulfilling religious obligations at enormous personal and state expense. He brought architectural and intellectual advancement to his kingdom, but he also ruled through absolute monarchy in an empire built partly on enslaved labor. The gold he distributed so generously was mined partly by slaves in brutal conditions. The magnificence he displayed was funded by extraction from conquered peoples who had no choice in their subjugation. The stability he created depended on military force ready to crush dissent, and his very success, his demonstration of African wealth, eventually contributed to European Powers viewing Africa as a continent whose resources deserved exploitation, whose kingdoms deserved conquest, whose people could be enslaved and transported across an ocean to fuel European colonial ambitions. These contradictions don't resolve easily. Musa was simultaneously a brilliant ruler who elevated his civilization and an absolute monarch who ruled through force and exploitation. He was a devout Muslim who took his faith seriously, and a pragmatic politician who used religion as a tool for geopolitical advancement. He was generous to the point of economic disruption and ruthless in maintaining power. In the decade after Musa's death, Mali remains powerful but faces increasing challenges. His son and grandson struggle to maintain central authority. Trade routes that once flowed smoothly through Malian territory become contested as various groups assert independence. The southern people in the south raid Malian cities, including briefly attacking Timbuktu. The desert tribes from in the north increasingly operate independently of Malian authority. Yet the infrastructure Musa built endures for generations. The mosques stand, the universities continue teaching. The manuscripts accumulate in Timbuktu's libraries. Scholars still travel to West Africa seeking knowledge and patronage. For roughly another century, Mali remains a significant power, even as its borders contract and its influence diminishes. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage remains the single, most famous event in medieval West African history, not because it was militarily significant, or because it changed political boundaries, but because it forcibly inserted Africa into the medieval world's consciousness. Before Musa, European and Arab sources barely mentioned sub-Saharan Africa beyond vague references to gold sources somewhere south of the Sahara. After Musa, detailed accounts describe West African kingdoms, their wealth, their rulers, and their capabilities. The economic impact of his spending is measurable across a decade of Southern Europe and Northern Africa region trade records. The architectural impact survives in buildings still standing 700 years later. The intellectual impact lives in the manuscripts preserved from Timbuktu's golden age as a scholarly center. Modern economists study Musa's journey as a case study in how currency supply affects inflation. Historians debate whether his display of wealth ultimately helped or harmed Africa by attracting destructive European attention. Architectural historians examine how his imported scholars blended North African and West African building traditions. What can a 14th-century African emperor's pilgrimage teach us today? Perhaps that soft power, cultural influence, economic leverage, intellectual prestige can accomplish what military force cannot. Musa didn't conquer Cairo with armies. He conquered European and Arab imagination with gold and magnificence. He proved that strategic generosity could be more disruptive than war. But his story also reminds us that unintended consequences can dwarf intended ones. Musa wanted to demonstrate African civilization's sophistication. He succeeded, and in succeeding, helped create myths about African wealth that would eventually motivate European colonization. The same maps that honor him as the richest king eventually guide slave traders to Africa's coast. His legacy forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, wealth, and historical memory. We celebrate his achievements while acknowledging they were built on systems, slavery, absolute monarchy, military conquest, that we now recognize as unjust. We admire his faith while recognizing he used religion as a political tool. We're awed by his wealth while understanding it was extracted from people who had no choice in the matter. 700 years later, aspects of Musa's story remain mysterious. We don't know his exact birth date or death date. We don't have his own words. Everything we know comes from Arab historians who interviewed people who met him, or who heard stories from travelers. We don't fully understand Mali's internal politics or how decisions were made. We can't verify the exact amounts of gold he carried. Estimates range from plausible to fantastical. But the core story survives because it's too specific, Too counterintuitive, too well documented across multiple independent sources to be pure legend. Musa's caravan was real. His spending really did crash Cairo's economy. His pilgrimage really did transform how the medieval world saw Africa. And somewhere in the Sahara, preserved in sand and stone and oral tradition, the memory endures of a caravan so magnificent that it became the most feared sight in the desert. Not because it brought war, but because it brought wealth so vast that it destabilized everything it touched. What do you think? Was Mansa Musa's pilgrimage ultimately good or bad for Africa's future? Did his demonstration of wealth help or harm subsequent African kingdoms? Can we celebrate his achievements while acknowledging their problematic foundations? How would you have handled ruling an empire built on gold and slavery while trying to remain true to religious principles of charity and justice? And here's the question that haunts me. If you had the power to reshape how history remembered you, would you choose Musa's path, spectacular, disruptive, impossible to ignore, but with consequences you can't control? Or would you choose a quieter legacy that might not echo across centuries but also wouldn't accidentally inspire exploitation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this story of how one man's generosity became an economic weapon fascinates you, subscribe for more untold historical narratives that challenge everything you thought you knew. And if you want to dive deeper into how Mali's golden age shaped modern Africa, check out our video on Timbuktu's manuscript treasures and the scholars fighting to preserve them. History isn't just about kings and battles. Sometimes it's about a caravan crossing the desert, loaded with so much gold that even generosity becomes dangerous. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a sword. It's a gift so overwhelming that it breaks the world's economy for a decade. That's the legacy of Mansa Musa, the emperor who proved that fear doesn't always come from violence. Sometimes it comes from impossible, incomprehensible, world-changing generosity.